Welcome to the urgency of slowing down. I'm your host, Laura L. Smith. Join me as I chat with the most amazing guests about ways we can fight hustle culture to slow down and step into the beautiful and abundant, unforced rhythms of grace Jesus invites us into. Today, we're going to talk about slowing down for Sabbath with one of my favorites, Annie F. Downs. Annie is a New York Times bestselling author, sought-after speaker, and successful podcast host based in Nashville and sometimes New York City. Engaging and honest, she makes readers and listeners feel as if they've been longtime friends. She really does, guys. Co-founder of the That Sounds Fun network, which includes her named flagship podcast, That Sounds Fun, and author of multiple best-selling books, including That Sounds Fun, 100 Days to Brave, and Remember God. Annie is the friend who will shoot straight, remind you that God is good, and still manage to make you laugh in the process. Annie, I am so excited you are joining me today. I can't thank you enough for being here.
Such an honor. I love talking about this. So this was easy to spend my time on today.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I want to talk about Sabbath, but I want to start this episode by reading a Bible verse to kind of frame our conversation for what Sabbath is all about. Okay. This is from Isaiah 58, verses 13, 14. I'm going to read from the Message. If you treat the Sabbath as a day of joy, God's holy day as a celebration, if you honor it by refusing business as usual, making money, running here and there, then you'll be free to enjoy God. Like, how good is God that he creates a day of rest for us? And I love this phrase here, free to enjoy God. Like, so beautiful. You are so public about how you practice Sabbath on the regular, that you take a weekly Sabbath. Can you chat a bit about what prompted you to start practicing Sabbath in the first place and what a typical Sabbath looks like for you?
Yeah, I love that you say practicing, because I think that is one of the most important things to remember about our spiritual disciplines is we are always practicing.
For sure.
And so I heard Jeff Bethkeet say one time that if you have a bad Christmas day, you don't cancel Christmas for the rest of your life. And I think that's really important because not all Sabbaths are created equal. Not all of them go the way you want to. I started practicing Sabbath in 2015. I actually went to Israel and experienced a real Shabbat dinner. And I experienced in Jerusalem what happens between sundown on Friday and sundown on Saturday.
Right.
And it really moved me and changed me. And then I came home back to Nashville and I read Garden City by John Mark Comer.
So good. One of my favorites.
Absolutely. It's kind of my baseline. If anyone says, what book should I read next? Garden City is my first go-to.
So good.
And so I think it's just a really important book start to finish, but he teaches about Sabbath in it. And I had never thought about or been taught about what it would look like to bring Sabbath into a Protestant 2024 life.
Yeah.
I understood it for Jews historically. I understood it for Christians in history. I didn't understand what it would look like to practice as a grown woman in 2024.
Right.
And so, so my practice has changed over the years. It depends on whether I'm traveling or not. I have a pretty untraditional life, meaning that I work on weekends sometimes.
Right.
And either I am speaking at a conference over a weekend or I'm preaching at church on Sunday. And either of those adjust the day of the week of my Sabbath.
Right.
But as soon as we book a speaking event, pretty much in that same conversation that we add that to the calendar, we add Sabbath that week to my calendar.
Yeah.
It just is a massive priority to me to have that day of rest. So for me, what it looks like, I'm not married yet. I don't have kids. So it's just me at my house. If it's a normal week and I'm not traveling, it will be my Saturday. And so Friday night, probably after dinner, I go ahead and kind of power down my social media. I stop posting, I stop scrolling. I kind of try to do sundown to sundown as well. And so I usually eat dinner with friends, do something fun. And then my goal on Saturdays is low tech, like no social media. There's no reason for me to get on any social media, partly because my job, the minute I'm on Instagram, I'm working.
Right. Same.
And so even this morning, I was looking at something and I opened it to look at something that a friend had texted me about. And there's a DM of someone asking me for something that I need to tell my team. So by 6:50, I was at work today.
Yeah.
Right. And so, so it's no tech. I do sometimes watch TV because I love sports. And sports are really relaxing for me. And so love watching soccer in the mornings or football in the mornings. But usually what happens is I wake up when I want to. I close my curtains on Friday night. It's the only night of the week I close my curtains. It's kind of like a Sabbath treat. I wake up when I want to wake up on Saturday. I read, I pray, kind of take it real slow on Saturday morning. The things I do are rest, celebration, worship. That's all I do in my Sabbath. The things I don't do are chores and work of any kind. So I don't dishwasher, I don't laundry, I don't straighten up my house. That's not what Saturday's for. That's what Sunday's for.
Yeah.
And so, and then I usually like listen to an audiobook or do a puzzle or go on walks. I don't do any exercise that I track on Saturdays, because that fits in the work category for me.
Turn off the Strava app.
Yeah. So if I'm going to work, if I'm going to go on a walk or go on a run, I'm doing it because I want to and because I like how it feels, not because I'm trying to tick a box.
Right.
Sabbaths are not for ticking boxes. And so, and then usually in the afternoon, I see friends. Like I'll meet up with people, go see a movie. I'll go play with people's kids. Like I try to really bring in the celebration part and the community part of Sabbath after lunch.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. No, I love how you started by saying you didn't know how this worked for a Protestant woman like in 2024. And I totally agree. I grew up in a Protestant church, and Sabbath, I've heard the word all the time, but to me, it just meant going to church on Sunday, which is a great thing to do. I love going to church on Sunday, but that's not what God intended Sabbath for. He intended it as this day of rest. Like in Genesis, we see him creating for 6 days and taking a rest, not because God is tired. He's not. He's God, but because he knew we needed a day of rest and he wanted to give it to us from the get-go. And so I think that is something that our culture, even in the Christian culture, we don't all really think about as much, like what
Well, I do think, I think a truth for a lot of my friends is Sunday is their Sabbath, and part of their Sabbath is going to church.
Right.
And so I do think there are a lot of people who can make going to church part of their Sabbath rhythms and still make it part of their rest. Now, if you're volunteering that week, you're probably not resting. If you're preaching that week, if you're singing in the choir that week, you're probably not resting. But if you're going to worship, I do think Sundays are a very valuable day because so many people choose to rest.
Right.
The thing that doesn't work for me is that's also when I make my grocery list or when I look at my calendar for next week or when I do any kind of work I got to be ready for. And so I don't want my Sabbath cut short because of Sunday scaries. And so I like, but there's a lot of people that are parents that the kids have soccer matches on Saturday or baseball games on Saturday or recitals on Saturday. And so Sunday is the quieter day. I have some friends here who signed their kids up for traveling soccer that doesn't play on Sundays because they wanted Sunday to be family and Sabbath and together. And so I think that there are times where Sunday can be the exact right answer for someone as far as their Sabbath.
No, I think that's actually what I love about this conversation is Sabbath can be whatever day of the week. Like it was traditionally for the Jewish nation, sundown Friday to Saturday. But because of where we live and how we live, and Jesus just asked us to do it how we can, where we are, like that might be Saturdays for you or Wednesdays for someone else listening or, but it's a day of intentional rest. And yes, Sunday going to church, I love that. Sunday is typically my Sabbath, except for if I am teaching or at a conference somewhere. But if not, I rearrange schedule also because I can start that slow morning with church and worship with community, but also that the rest of the day for me, I need to take that whole day of Sabbath, not just going to church in the morning. Like I need to also have my social media off and do things that are relaxing and life-giving. I loved some of the things that you said that you do, like doing a puzzle or being with friends. Like those are things that are life-giving to Andy F. Downs, right? Like watching sports. So I think the key there is if you're listening and you're trying to do this, like find things that are life-giving and relaxing.
Matt Chandler taught one time, and this is from a Jewish teacher, but one of the things he taught me that I hang on to is when you are trying to figure out what to do on your Sabbath, what he taught was if you work with your mind, Sabbath with your hands. And if you work with your hands, Sabbath with your mind.
Yep.
And that has been really helpful for me because there are weeks where I am on the go and I'm doing so much. And so my Sabbath needs to be sitting and reading or just like listening to music and doing nothing, doing a puzzle or whatever. There are other times where my whole week has been sitting at a computer writing and I've been working or thinking for the whole week. And so my Sabbath needs to be something I do with my body, whether it's going on a walk or going to the pool and swimming or doing something to let my brain have a break. And so I think as people are deciding, and John Tyson teaches a lot about pleasure stacking on your Sabbath. So doing multiple things that you love at the same time. And so as you are sussing out what is my day and what do I want to do on my Sabbath that is not work, that is not chores, that is not adding to your list of things you're checking off, sussing out, well, did I work this week mostly with my mind or with my hands? Because then that narrows down the category of what your Sabbath fun could be.
Yeah, 100%. No, I love that teaching too. I've heard you talk about that, and I share that with people too. It's really, it's a great way to kind of start thinking.
I spent all week writing, and we've spent a couple of weeks writing. And I went to Dollywood on Saturday, which is an amusement park in East Tennessee. And it was the most restful because we walked around. We had a great time. My friends and I just drove over and drove back. I mean, it was so relaxing, even though I wasn't just sitting on my couch, but it's because all week long, 2 weeks really, I had done nothing but work with my mind.
Yeah.
So I needed a day that was just fun, that was just running around.
Yeah. Outside.
Yeah.
Different scenery. Yeah. All of it. All of it. That's good. Okay. So we talked about like all the lovely things you do on Sabbath. What's the hardest part of this rhythm of rest for you?
I don't ever want, this isn't true. For all the things that COVID stole from us, I think it gave me a couple of things too. And one of the things it gave me is an ability to be with myself. I've been by myself a lot. I hadn't really enjoyed being with myself. And so before COVID, 2015 to 2020 in my practice, so the first half of my practice, I guess, I would have told you the hardest thing was being alone that much. Being alone half a day Saturday, not connecting with friends on purpose, not leading. I'm a very pursuant friend. And so I tend to, let me check in and let me call and that has changed after COVID. I'm better in the mornings and in the quiet than I used to be. So I would think the hardest thing for me is when I feel like my rest gets taken by something else. If something interrupts, if an emergency comes up, if something needs to change and I have like longed for that day.
Yeah.
And that is going to happen sometimes. Like
for sure.
Again, you don't cancel Christmas after one bad one. So it's going to happen sometimes that you have this day plan of exactly what you want to do. I've had the same puzzle sitting on my table waiting on me for 3 weeks. And sometimes your plans change. And so that's the hardest for me. And what that reminds me, it makes me think about the rest of my week and why I'm putting so much pressure on my Sabbath. Because I also think that's what we do to vacation is we build up a whole year's worth of, I need a rest.
Right.
And we try to do it in 1 week. And then I'm always disappointed.
Right.
And so that's probably what's hardest for me is when it gets stolen is the language my head uses when I feel sorry for myself. The reality is I could insist and I don't,
Yeah.
And so that's probably what's hardest for me.
No, that's fair. And I think that's why we talked about at the beginning that it's a practice and also that it's a rhythm because we're not going to get it perfect. And sometimes circumstances, you can't control what's actually happening.
Right.
If someone in your life has an emergency and you need to be at the hospital with a friend,
right.
Like that's the best way to spend that day. God is so glad that you are doing that day. He's not mad at you that you didn't do a puzzle, right? He wants you to love on your friend. So I think it is. It's
and
just practice.
This is probably true for you, Laura, the longer you practice, the more people don't expect you on a Saturday morning.
True.
And the longer you practice, the more people kind of understand like, oh, Annie isn't going to be like my first year or so. Social media followers were surprised they didn't see me 7 days a week. And now they are not surprised at all. I don't ever get where are you DMs anymore.
Yeah.
I don't get them with I miss a day. And in the summer, I take a month off social media. I feel like Mike Kelsey taught me this. It was either Mike Kelsey or Jonathan Pekluda, but they say, pull away 1 day a week, 1 week a month, 1 month a year from social. And so nobody asks where I am anymore when I take the month of July off or the month of June. Because I've taught them what to expect. And what to expect is Annie rests. And part of her rest is not being on social.
Yeah, right. No, 100%. I have the luxury that I can turn off my phone. So I turn it off Saturday night and don't turn it on until about 1 or 2 in the afternoon on Sunday.
That's cool.
So I have that luxury. But even my family, my kiddos will be like, well, we're just going to call dad on Sunday morning because we know mom's phone is off, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I love that they know, I mean, of course they can call dad if they need me. I'm there for them, but also they just know mom's phone's off. It's just setting those expectations for your people that this
Yeah.
is your day of rest, which is really
Yeah,
good.
I appreciate you bringing that up because for married friends and single friends, that part is a little different. I don't know.
Right.
I wouldn't have called it a luxury. That's kind of you to say that. I think it's just the reality. I don't know that I don't want a married person to ever feel guilty that they get to turn their phone off and single people don't. But it is a difference of when Sabbath is taught from a stage to a congregation, it's helpful when the preacher remembers that according to Barna, 30 to 40% of the people sitting out there aren't going to turn their phones off because they aren't safe to turn their phone off because they live alone.
For sure. For
And
sure.
so that there are some adjustments to Sabbath when you don't have a family, just like there were adjustments to lockdown when you didn't have a family. So
Right.
there are a few little tweaks that are different in my life than your life or than in some of the preachers' lives that teach on Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely consider it a luxury. And I think that's so important that how I do Sabbath, how you do Sabbath is not how people who are listening have to do Sabbath. They
That's
need
right.
to figure out what is safe for them, what
That's
is
right.
healthy for them, how they can worship and rest and celebrate on
Yeah, very
their day.
descriptive what you and I are doing, not prescriptive. Because
Exactly.
there are times, Laura, where my Saturday Sabbath, so I'll go speak on a weekend. This is coming up in 2 weeks. I'll go speak on a weekend. My Sabbath will be Wednesday, and then I have a Sabbath on Saturday because I'm not speaking the next weekend.
Right.
That doesn't mean I'm doing this wrong. That doesn't mean that I'm
No.
taking more time off. It means that I am still practicing once a week.
Yeah.
They just are not 7 days apart because that week goes
It
till
couldn't be.
Wednesday. And then, yeah. And so, and that's not every week, but that's sometimes. And that's not everyone's life. I think about the girls who live downstairs from me in my condo are night nurses. So their
Oh,
Sabbath looks really different than mine
for sure.
because their rhythms of their life are so different. And so I love you teaching that way of reminding people that we're describing what works for us. We're not prescribing what is the right way to Sabbath.
Yeah, for sure. God is just so grateful we're being intentional to rest with him.
Yeah.
He's not grading us on this.
Yeah.
Thankfully. Thankfully. Okay. You mentioned for a second how you take a month off social media in the summer, which I love, but you do more than that. You take you take an entire month off of work, which I adore. It is so countercultural and I love it. I was just listening recently to your talk with Dr. Nijay Gupta on the early Christians and Roman culture and how the early Christians were so countercultural to Roman culture
Yeah.
and like that we are called to not be conformed to the patterns of this world, right? But the world tells us we need to work, we need to get stuff done. Like, girl, you better hustle. And the truth is, God calls us to this rest. And you talked about like a day a week a month, a year off social media, but you actually take a month off work and you also let your staff take a month off work, which is such a blessing to them.
Not quite. I take a month and my staff takes 2 weeks.
Okay, you give them 2 whole weeks. So,
yes,
and
I
you
give
take
them
a
2
whole
weeks
month.
at in the summer, and then they get 2 weeks at Christmas. That is not count against their vacation days or sick days.
Yeah, which is like a huge gift that you give them.
Yeah, thanks.
It's very generous of
me
you.
too. I'm grateful.
Well, I love how you do this. I want to know what prompted you to say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to trust God with an entire month. Like, people want you. They want you to speak. They want you to be on their podcast. They're waiting for your podcast. They're waiting for your books. You have contracts. You have deadlines. And you're like, that's all true. But also, God, I'm trusting you with a whole month. So what prompted you to be like, I'm going to do this?
Yeah. So part of it is I used to be a school teacher. And much like everyone listening, I went to school my whole life and we always got summers off. And so my brain never unschooled a little bit.
Love it. Love it. Love
So
it.
that's a little bit part of it. You know, I'll tell you the other interesting thing I think you'll like, Laura, is as a team, we are still practicing how that rhythm works best for us. So last summer, a team and I, how did we work this? Let me think for just a second so I can tell you correctly. We all started our break on the same day. They had 2 weeks off. They came back for 2 weeks and then I came back. Well, what we learned, and that was the month of July. So we all worked through the end of June. We took off the 4th of July and the week after, and then I stayed gone for the rest of the month. They came back. What I noticed at the end of that year, or at the end of that Sabbath, is that we had army crawled into our summer Sabbath, and then August hits and we have to run.
Yeah.
And so this year, 2024, what we did is we went, okay, let's switch that. Let's do the month of June. Penny will leave June 1 and be gone, or like June 8, and do 2 weeks. And then everybody will have July 4th and the week after July 4th, and then we'll all come back mid-July. So we're just practicing what's the rhythm that's right for our team. So the way this worked is we loved how we like walked in the Sabbath. No one was army crawling. We were not exhausted. We had finished May and we had one more week. And then we were like, okay, y'all have a good summer. And then when we came back, we didn't have to run because we came back mid-July when a lot of people are still on vacation.
Right. It's still,
so
it's
it was
a
almost
slower
kind of
time.
funny because I'd come back to work and be like, everybody ready? And our emails are, we're on vacation. I was like, I thought we were running. And but the thing we did learn is it's not healthy for the team when I come back on the same day as them.
Oh, okay.
It's too stressful. They haven't gone through their list yet. They haven't checked their emails. They can't answer my questions. I'm ready to run.
You're coming at them rapid fire.
Right.
Yeah.
So in 2025, I'm going to be gone for a week. They're going to go for 2 middle weeks. I'm going to be gone for a week, and then we'll all be back together, right? So they'll have a week on either side of me. We're just trying it and seeing what will work. So for me, first I wanted to explain that to tell people it's just a practice we try. And when people ask me if I'm on a business podcast, Laura, or if I'm on some sort of panel that's about being an entrepreneur, and people say things like, how did your businesses grow so fast? And how are you able to do all this? And how do you have a staff? My answer is always tithing and Sabbath.
I love it.
Because if you give back to the Lord a part of what he has given to you, he honors it every time.
He does.
And so it is not about the 11 months of work we do. It's about the 1 month of rest we do. And we aren't just resting from, we're resting to.
Absolutely.
And so for me, it is a constant reminder that God is the one who provides for us, not me.
Right.
I don't have to work 12 months a year. Our pastor at Crosspoint, Pastor Kevin Queen, he often says God can do more in 6 days than you could do in 7.
Yes.
And so I believe that.
Yeah.
And so I'm very happy to take a day off every week. We don't lose audience members because of that. My numbers don't shrink. When I'm gone for a month in the summer and we come back, we haven't had less downloads on the podcast, or I don't lose a bunch of followers on Instagram, or people unsubscribe from our email list. It's the opposite. It grows when we're gone. So it has never proven to hurt us to rest.
Right.
And so we will rest. And I think you know this, but I have been saving and have a real plan for us to get a real extended break in 2027 for my whole staff. Because the Bible also says every 7 years, let the fields rest.
Right. Yeah.
And we don't do that when we're not farmers. Farmers have to do that. The rest of us think we have to produce every year. We don't. And so we're going to practice that in some way in 2027. I don't know if it's the whole year or part of the year, but we're going to practice in 2027, letting the fields rest.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. My husband is a professor and we live in a college town. You talked about still being on a school calendar.
Yeah.
I'm forever on a school calendar because our whole town is on a school calendar.
Yeah. I love that.
But professors actually get a sabbatical every 7 year.
For how long?
A year. I mean, they get to choose to take a half year or a full year. But if you're a tenured professor, you get the word sabbatical every 7th year. So it's biblical that this is built into the academic structure. And it makes me so excited to be like, this principle of Christ, of God, is still in our culture, and people aren't realizing that they're using that word sabbatical and they're not even putting it with Sabbath.
Right. That's right.
But it is this beautiful rhythm of, like how do we rest, and how do we, like the farmers originally, like you said, they let the soil like re-nutrient itself and heal. And the Sabbath is such a healing day. We think that our culture yells at us that we need to be productive 24/7 to get it all done. But the truth is, like you were saying, like the world will keep spinning if we take the day off. If we don't think that God can handle our workload or our to-dos if we take a day off, then we have a very small image of God.
Yeah. I mean, it's modeled to us in 2 ways from the world, because in one world, we see the finance bros in New York City. There was just an article about this, about a young man in 35 years old dying because he didn't get sleep for multiple days in a row because of his finance job and how much he was giving without any rest. The other side is Adele. Adele hasn't made us an album in years, and no one is caring less about her.
No, she's
Everyone
still
loves
super
her music.
talented. Yeah.
That's right. And so we see these jockeying positions outside of the faith that that are I'm not talking about them as people. I'm just saying their jobs, they're outside of the faith. And you kind of go, man, there's this one example of work once every 7 years. And this other example of work 7 days a week and sleep 3 hours a night. And neither of those are what is biblically offered to us to make the most impact in our lives. The most impact we can make is working for our lives, working with God, partnering with Him 6 days a week.
Yeah, it's so much, we were talking about Garden City before.
Yeah.
But yeah, he talks so much like God invites us into work. In the Garden of Eden, there was work from the get-go. God is like, hey, Adam, Eve, like, help me garden this.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
God doesn't need us to garden. But
Yes.
From the get-go, that's what God has asked us to do. I love how Jesus asked the disciples to, pass out the fishes and loaves. Like, Jesus doesn't need them to do that. He could have snapped his finger and everyone could have had fish and loaves like on special plates in front of him.
That's right.
But he invites us into this work. That's part of what he calls us to do. And then he also invites us into rest. And I think it's that rhythms, these unforced rhythms of grace, right? The work and the go, the work and the slow, and the stop and the go. And that's what's really beautiful. And that's what God's really designed for us, because he's so good.
Yes.
But he does it himself, and like a sunrise and a sunset every day, and the 4 seasons. Like, God is giving us seasons and ups and downs to show us that this is good.
That's right. That we're meant to pay attention to seasons in our lives as well. So I think that's hugely important.
Yeah. You shared that this summer, while you were on your Sabbath, that an emergency came up at work, and you had to actually kind of exit out of Sabbath and tend to some things and come back. So, one, I love that you shared that, because again, we need to remember this is a practice. And so I think you sharing it says like, hey, listen, it didn't go exactly how I expected it would. I didn't take 30 full days off. I had to
That's right.
And I also love that you weren't legalistic about it. I think that's something that's really important. Like, our Sabbath is sacred, and it's a time to reconnect with God and really just to receive the gifts that he gave us. He said he created Sabbath for man, not the other way around. It's a way to receive the goodness he has for us. But also, we can't be like, it has to be exactly like this, because God doesn't want us to be like that, and he's not grading or judging us. So you came back. I want to know how hard it was to kind of step in to make that decision. Like, okay, I was taking a month off. I was publicly taking a month off, and yet I still have to do this. And I don't know if you had to have some of your team come back into work who was off also. And then also, like,
the team
they didn't have to. Okay, it was just you. And then how did you step back out? Because I know for me, like, I love my Sabbath, and I'm pretty good at putting my phone down and not working, and not even, I have an office at home. I just shut the door and I don't come in here.
Yeah.
If I have a really important thing, I write it on a sticky note and just throw it like under the door of my office. Like, got that idea out of my head. I'm not going to ignore that God gave me an idea, but I'm also not going to do it. But when I start work again on Monday, my brain, like, it's rested. So it has tons of ideas and it gets excited. So when you had some rest and you had to step back in, how hard was it to step back out? So all of it, like, how was it to step in, and how hard was it to step out? Once you are in, then you see some of the emails and you see some of the stuff. Like, how do you
Well, when the opportunity came to step back in earlier than I planned on, I'm in a small group of women that are running businesses that are also public facing in their jobs. So they have So I run 2 businesses. I have AFD Inc. that is my writing, my speaking, my podcast. That sounds fun. And then I run a podcast network, right? And then I'm a co-owner of the network. And so I run 2 businesses. So I'm in a group of women who run businesses that are also have a public life. And so I went to them first when the opportunity came up to come back to work earlier than I planned on. And I said, how do I do this? How do I do this when I don't feel rested yet and I don't feel quite ready to come back? I have not gotten bored, which is a big goal of mine in my summer. And so I processed it with them first and kind of said, what are the roadblocks here? What are the banks of this river? Like, what do I do and what don't I do? And what does this look like? And so that helped a lot to have a community of people who have very similar job to me.
Yeah.
And many of them are much more public than I am and have much larger audiences and much larger companies. And so it was easy to kind of go like, how have y'all been in this seat before? I remember just like processing part of what had happened at work with one of it. I'm just on Marco Polo, just crying and being like, has anything like this ever happened to you? And she was like, yes, this is 100%. She was like, here's the 4 times it happened in the last 2 decades. I was like, oh, okay. So that's how I made the decision well, not the decision. The decision was less my decision. It was more, here's when the decision was made and I was coming back, I had some boundaries around what I was going to be able to do and what I was not going to be able to do and how that would change. I did not get to leave again. So once I was back in, my brain was back in.
You're back in.
And so I stayed off social media for the 30 days. That didn't change.
Yeah.
And I don't have email on my phone during my summer Sabbath. I don't have, everything's deleted off my phone. I don't even have the opportunity to open that stuff up. That didn't change.
Yeah.
Over those
that
days.
temptation.
Yeah. So it was when I was sitting and I just had to be in some meetings. When I was in those meetings, I was all the way in. And when I was at the office, I was all the way in. And when I was home, I was all the way out. And so that was kind of the boundary I drew for myself for that time that didn't go exactly as we had scheduled it to go. Whereas now, like I told you with Instagram, like I can work anytime, unfortunately. And I'm available. Like this morning, I had to work on some stuff. So I got up and was ready and at a coffee shop in the 7s and came to work a little bit early. Like I worked outside of 9 to 5 today.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do that, but I didn't do that at all those days that I was back in the office early.
No, that's really good. You still set boundaries.
Yeah, I still had higher boundaries than my normal life, but more work than my normal Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just had to adjust because life.
Yeah, that's right. There just wasn't an option on this. And I mean, my business coach agreed, my small group agreed. Like there was not anyone that was like, this is the wrong answer. They were all like, no, this is what has to happen this year. And it is right and good. Yeah. And of course the Lord too. But I got wisdom outside of what me and God were thinking because I wanted other voices in it with me.
Yeah. Which is, we're talking about Sabbath today, but I think it brings up a great topic about community.
Yeah.
That we need community to do everything, even to Sabbath. We need those people in our lives who will speak truth to us, who will point us back to truth, who we can just, who help us along the journey, because there's things we can map out what we think Sabbath will look like or how we think our work life should look like, or family or relationships or church or any of it. But we need those people, those good voices in our head that can help us process that stuff.
Yeah.
We weren't meant to do this alone.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I love that you turned to community to do that. I think that's so important. Absolutely. Okay, so what are some of the lessons that you've learned from doing Sabbath, like both your weekly Sabbath and your summer Sabbath?
Yeah, gosh, they're kind of a little bit endless. I mean, I think the secret, the magic potion to Sabbath is you actually get more done the rest of the week. You think you're going to get less done and you actually get more done. And I was surprised by that. Yeah. I was surprised that it felt like every other day was more successful, not less successful. And it has, in 9 years of practicing, I want to make sure I'm telling you the truth. I have never had a Sabbath that cost me moving other things forward.
Yeah.
That were meant to move forward ever.
Yeah.
Not a summer rate, not our days off in the winter, not a once a week. It's never cost me what God had for me and the work he had me to put my hands to. And I mean, Dr. Phil says this, but you teach people how to treat you. And that has been a major thing I learned from my practice of Sabbath in the summer. You're right. There are speaking events that come in, there are deadlines, but our partners in publishing kind of like, as soon as a Sabbath is over, kind of ask us what next year's dates are. They have figured out that we're not available to them as a whole team for a chunk of the summer. Right. And so people learn, they will adjust just like they adjusted when you moved to a different city, or they adjusted when you got married or had a kid. They will adjust to your spiritual rhythms too, and you'll be fine. Everybody will be fine. So I think those have been really important. And I'm just thankful for the friendship it's given me with God. It just feels like I have a day of intentional friendship every week that may not be true if I was working 7 days a week, or not even working in the office. I don't know a lot of people who go in the office 7 days a week, but there's a real world where you can do 5 days in the office and 1 day of chores and 1 day of sports with your family, and suddenly you haven't had any break.
Yeah, for sure.
And there are people like you, there are a lot of people who figure out, I can think of 2 families I'm close with that have figured out how to practice Sabbath as a family, even when the kids are young and when they're teenagers. And it is a practice you can do when you have family.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure it is. Yep. It's just setting boundaries with that family too. I love that you talk about how you actually get more done, that God rewards our obedience. Like he's not concerned with outcomes. Like we are so concerned about our outcomes. What did I get done this week? How many things did I check off my list this week? Did I do that big thing, land that big thing? Did I do enough? But God is just more concerned about our obedience and following him. And that is stepping into the work he invites us into, and the passions that he calls us to, and the dreams he puts on our hearts. Like he wants us all in on that, but he also invites us to this rest. And when we do, he always rewards that.
Yeah,
Like
that's right.
He
That's
always
right.
rewards that rest, whether we're more productive in that coming week because we're actually more rested and our brain is thinking more clearly and we're not as frazzled and fragmented. Like
Yeah,
if I'm tired, if I'm not sleeping well enough, I get headaches, and then I'm not working as well during the week, right? Like I'm
right.
distracted and fragmented. And
That's
so
right.
whether we get more done because we're actually just physically rested and our brains are
Yeah.
rested, or
Yeah.
because God just is multiplying it, like
Right.
both and
Both.
probably,
Yeah, I think it's
right?
both.
Both and.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
So I think that's just such a beautiful thing, that our obedience in saying we're going to take some time to rest, and we're not sure, we're going to plan how we hope that looks so that it's intentional, but also we can't control how it's going to turn out. Like you had to come back to work, but you were still intentional when you came back to work. You're like, I'm still not getting on social media. I'm still like, work is turned off at 5 or 6 every night. Like I'm not, I could send emails all night long, or, write chapters all night long, or, but you're still intentional. And that intentionality, like, Jesus, I love you best. I love you most. I want to honor you. I want to spend time with you. I want to do this for you. And when we do that for him, he actually just like lavishes love on us. It's so sweet.
Yeah, I mean,
and
one of
so
the
good.
hardest times for me to take a Sabbath is when I'm writing a book, because if I'm in the flow, I don't want to get out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I have to like really say to myself, you, in the long run, this will not serve you. This will hurt you.
Yeah.
So get all your ideas down on a piece of paper on Friday, and then do not come back to this until Sunday.
Yeah.
And the only way I can really long-term survive. Now I could do that for a month and not notice and not see any difference and go, it doesn't matter that much. But in the long run, you will start feeling that cost of not taking a day.
Yeah.
And I'm not willing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's too good. It's too good to give up. So what other advice do you have someone who's listening, who's never taken a Sabbath and is thinking about doing it? Like, where would you tell them, how would you tell them to start?
Yeah. My first advice is don't start with 24 hours, because it's going to feel insane.
It's going to feel too hard.
Start with 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon where you put away your phone and you turn off the TV, turn off your calendar, and just be with your people or be alone and do 2 hours. And I think that's one of the things I've watched parents with young kids do, is trade off. You can go have 2 hours, and then you come home and I'll go have 2 hours at a coffee shop or at a park or whatever. And so I think you start by doing shorter periods, and start by going, okay, I cannot imagine sundown to sundown not checking my email, but
Right.
I can imagine not checking my email from 9 a.m. to noon on a Saturday.
Right.
And it might be hard and I might get stressed, but I can do it.
Yeah.
There are people already saying back to you and me, I can't do it. I can't do it. My boss will let me do it.
Right.
I would push back on you and say, I think you can.
Yeah.
I think it may be short-term problematic and long-term beneficial.
Yeah.
And so, or you find 3 hours where you can,
Right.
6 to 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, just to start your practice.
Yep.
And so that's what I would say, is start small and build your way up and get all these resources. I mean, your resources are incredible around this. Matthew Sleeth has a book called 23/7 that is really incredible. No, I'm sorry. I did the math wrong. Matthew Sleeth has a book called 24/6. And it's about Sabbath. I did that backwards. Garden City by John Mark Comer. John Mark's Practicing the Way also has an entire Sabbath practice that you can learn from.
And his
Jeff
ruthless
Beck-
elimination of hurry.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So there's just a lot of resources that are worth, we have an entire Sabbath. I mean, I think it's anniefdowns.com/Sabbath is an entire page with a bunch of resources that we have found helpful. And so I think start learning and start practicing at the same time. Don't make yourself do 24 hours at the start. Give yourself 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
And then after a couple of weeks, bump it up to half a day. And then, go ahead right now in the summer and look at January and pick a Saturday where you're not going to be available to anybody on a Saturday. You're just going to rest and worship and celebrate. Go ahead and plan to have friends over for dinner on Friday night and just mark that day like you mark a retreat, and go ahead and plan to practice that whole day and see if that is a rhythm you can keep up. Or if you need to go, we still need to do half day for a little bit longer because of our lives, and then just work your way up to it.
Yeah. Amen. I love that. I love that. The only thing I would add is to be creative. Like when you're like, oh, I don't like, there were so many years our kids were in soccer tournaments. You mentioned soccer tournaments, but they were all weekend, every weekend. We had 3 kids play and travel soccer at the same time. And that was just what we were doing. So I started being creative by like, okay, there is always a big chunk of time between games.
Yeah.
And usually my child wants to be with their team. They're warming up and they go out to a team lunch. And then I would go for a walk and listen to worship music.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And so for
smart.
3 hours, I would listen to worship music, go for a walk, get lunch by myself, check in with my kiddo, make sure they were okay, but then also have some, and it was like 3 hours outside on a walk, listening to worship music. Like, it was awesome. So,
I mean, what a great conversation to have with another mom too, of going like, hey, on this weekend's tournament, I will make sure both of our kids are everywhere they're supposed to be all day Saturday. And next Saturday, can I have the afternoon off and go for 3 hours? I mean, that feels like such a great way to be creative in the middle of a really busy life.
And gift each other.
That's right.
Too. Yeah,
that's right.
That's
give
awesome.
her a chance to practice Sabbath, even if she doesn't know she wants to.
Right. Even if she doesn't know what it is, show her how good it is. Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely. So start slow, be creative, try now, and don't say you can't. I think don't say you can't. Give it a try before you say you can't. Yeah.
That's right. And start learning, start digging into the teaching around it and see what jumps out to you that works really well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I'll link all those resources, including your Sabbath page, in the show notes. Okay, Annie, since this podcast is called The Urgency of Slowing Down, I ask every guest what they're going to do this coming week to intentionally slow down something or some things in their life. How will you slow down?
How am I going to slow down this week? I mean, I have a weekend at home, which doesn't happen all the time. And so I will get to practice my normal Saturday rhythm of Sabbath, and I'm not responsible for anything at church on Sunday, except I'm always responsible to be there because that's how I feel about local church. We can talk about that some other time. So it is just a slower weekend for me after we had a crazy weekend 2 weekends ago with an event here in town, last weekend at Dollywood. And so this weekend is purposely quiet on a Saturday.
I love that. I love that. I pray that it is so peaceful for you.
Thank
and
you.
Life-giving. Absolutely. Okay, I will put all the links in the show notes, but please remind everyone how they can find you and how they can get a copy of your Advent study. You guys, that is so good. I got this with my daughters, and my daughters and I all went through it. You guys all want it. So let people know how they can get your Advent study and how they can find you.
Yeah. So you hear me say this a lot, but I'm embarrassingly easy to find because I'm Annie F. Downs everywhere. F as in fancy. And that's it. That's everywhere. AnnieFDowns.com. That's my Instagram, all the places you want to stay friends. We have an Advent study that I wrote a couple of years ago that will be available this year. And then we also have a new one. And so we'll have a brand new Advent study available in October. Advent this year goes December 1 to December 24. And so it's a little bit shorter season. It's really interesting. But this year's Advent series, this is breaking news. I haven't said this anywhere. It's called Stay Tuned, an Advent series for those already waiting. And so for anybody who feels like they're waiting already, who feels like the invitation to level up your waiting and like enjoy anticipation feels too heavy, this is the Advent study for you. And so those will all be available. We'll have everything Advent ready to go mid-October, and that'll be at anniefdowns.com/Advent.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I am so honored and so grateful for your time. Okay, everybody, go find some rest. Thank you, Annie.
Yeah. Thanks, Fred.
Thank you so much for joining me today for that awesome conversation with Annie F. Downs, praying you find ways to slow down from the hustle this week to practice Sabbath. no matter how that looks for you. So you can step into the goodness God has for you there by being intentional to set aside some time for rest, worship, and celebrating, and see how God uses that time to rest and restore you, so you can more fully experience the unforced rhythms of grace Jesus offers you. Links to Annie and her new Advent study, along with some of the other resources we chatted about, are all in the show notes. Make sure you're subscribing to the Urgency of Slowing Down podcast so you won't miss the next awesome episode. And for more ways to tap into the abundant life Jesus has for you and an entire chapter on Sabbath and more about it, grab a copy of my new book, The Urgency of Slowing Down, designed for individual or group study, available at booksellers everywhere.